Hi there, happy Friday. So today I'm going to talk with you. Sorry, I got loads of noisy things going on in the background here. So today I'm going to talk with you about the difference between leasehold and freehold, and how, if you own a leasehold property, what you're going to need to do in addition to get permission to actually make any alterations to that. So what does it mean? Well, basically a leasehold property means you don't really own it. You kind of have a right to use it for a certain number of years. So depending on your lease, which is a contract, it's the legal agreement between you and the landlord or freeholder. So you have the right to use the property, but you don't actually own the ground that it sits on. Whereas if you are the freeholder, then you own the building and you also own the ground. So that is the key difference really between a leasehold and a freehold. I kind of don't really like leaseholds personally that much, because in a way you don't really own it. You kind of just own the right to use it for the period of time. So it's a bit like a longer term, fancier kind, more expensive kind of rent. Whereas a freehold means you actually do own the property and you own the ground. But if you own, you do actually have a lot of rights as a leaseholder. And a lease can be anything from sort of a shorter term, maybe 40 years, to really a long time, like 999 years. So it can be a really long lease. But when that lease does end, so once that 40 years or 999 years has run out, then the ownership of that property then returns to the landlord automatically. However, you don't necessarily have to leave the property. You're still a tenant, and your lease sort of agreement can stay in place unless or until you or the landlord decide to end that agreement. So your lease, which is the contract that you as a leaseholder have with the freeholder or the landlord, that lease will contain certain conditions or clauses in there which will sort of determine what you have to do or things that you're not allowed to do. And so you may need to have particularly get special permission from them to carry out any alterations to your home. So if you're thinking about extending or making structural changes to your home, and it's a leasehold property, you might not be allowed to do that, or you are likely to have to apply to your freeholder to do that, depending on the terms of your lease. So make sure that you read your lease before you decide to start on the journey of making any changes to your home, because it might be that you're just not allowed to do it, or it may be that there are certain restrictions. You can do some things but not others. And you may also have certain other conditions, like you might have to pay for property maintenance, although that could also, it's possible that might be covered by the landlord. And you may have to pay a service charge, and you may have to pay ground rent, because at the end of the day you don't own the ground, so you do have to pay a certain amount of ground rent. It's not always very much, but it's very variable. Certainly flats, most of the time they are leasehold in England. In Scotland and in Wales, the law around leasehold and freehold is different, and certainly in Scotland a lot of the older flats, they're usually a freehold, and then it's a different situation. But in England, this is really what I'm talking about. What I'm covering here is the situation in England, because that's where I'm based and that's where I do most of my work. So what you can do with a lease, you can extend it, you can negotiate changes to the conditions of the lease, and you can end it. And you're also, if you You are also able to buy the freehold. If the freeholder is willing to sell it, it's possible for you to buy it, and then in that case you change from being the leaseholder to being the freeholder, and then basically you own the property and you own the ground, and you don't have to carry on complying with any restrictions that might be in a lease. So I hope that makes sense. If you have any questions about leasehold property or freehold property, pop them down in the comments below and I'll come back to you and answer those questions. But what then the next step, so say for example, you own a leasehold property and you really want to extend it, or you want to make some structural changes to it, and you've either read your lease and you don't need to have permission from the freeholder to make those sorts of changes, or you do have to have permission and you have got that permission from the freeholder to make those changes. Then the next stage is obviously designing it and then getting planning permission, because regardless of whether it's leasehold or freehold, for unless it's permitted development, then you are going to need planning permission anyway. So when you apply for planning permission as a freeholder, that's it. You apply for planning permission, you sign the certificate to say that you own the property, and you just apply for it. If you're a leaseholder, you do the same process, but you also have to send a notice to the freeholder to let them know that you have applied for planning permission. And if this is for your home, this notification or this notice is called the Household Development Notice. And so it's really recommended that you contact the freeholder or the landlord before you go down this route, regardless of what your not regardless of what your lease says. If your lease says you can make any sort of changes that you want to the property, then yeah, just you don't need to worry too much about it. Just go down the route of applying for planning permission and notifying them, and the chances are is not going to, there won't be any sort of comeback. But if your lease says you do have to have planning permission from the freeholder, then it's much better to contact them very early on in your project, maybe when you've got some sketch designs or even before that, just to check that they're going to be supportive of what you want to do, and to check really what the process is going to be. You may have to pay a fee for them to assess what you're planning to do and to give you permission to do that. And it's possible that if you haven't done that and you go through the process of the planning permission, you send the notification, they could then object to the work that you're doing, so that might make it more difficult for you to get planning permission as well. So that's it. I hope that that's been useful. If you have any questions about the difference between leasehold and freehold, please pop them in the comments below. If you're wondering who the hell is that, I'm not introduced myself. I'm Jane. I'm a chartered architect and eco refurbisher on the Green Register, and I help homeowners who own beautiful period property with a lot of potential to turn that property into a comfortable home that suits a modern lifestyle and helps you protect the planet at the same time. I'll speak to you next Friday. Bye for now. Doesn't want to finish.